At the beginning of the movie, we see a scene inside a prison in America. A prisoner named Jimmy is seen standing inside a prison cell.
Although his real name is Jimmy, people know him as the driver. Today is the day of his release, and just before he is set free, he stands holding a photograph, staring at it intently. He gazes at the photo with an emotional look in his eyes. From Jimmy's expression, it's clear that a storm is raging inside his mind. A few moments later, 2 police officers arrive, handcuff him, and take him to the warden's office. After completing all the formalities, Jimmy is released from prison. Once outside, he takes a list in his hand, a list with the names of certain people. These people have unfinished business with him, debts that go way back. Now, he must cross the desolate desert and leave the prison behind to return to the city. But there's no car waiting for him. So, under the scorching sun, he starts running down the road with intense determination. After traveling a long distance, he finally arrives at a garage. Without saying a word to anyone, he removes a cover to reveal a car. From inside the car, he pulls out a revolver and takes it in his hand. Then he grabs the car keys, starts the engine, and speeds off at full throttle. After arriving in the city, he parks the car on the side of the road and starts walking across the street. Cars speeding down the road are forced to slam on their brakes one after another at the sight of him. But he pays no attention to any of it. With a blank expression, he silently walks through the moving traffic. Then Jimmy enters an office without saying a word to anyone and starts looking for someone. After searching around for a while, he approaches a desk and points his revolver directly at the man sitting there. Before the man can understand what's happening, Jimmy shoots him in the forehead, a clean headshot. After this murder, the investigation of the case is handed over to 2 FBI detectives, Cop and Cicero. However, Cicero can't stand Cop as his partner, since they've had conflicts in the past. But putting their differences aside, they begin investigating the case together. The murder took place inside the office of a telecommunications company. Jimmy's face is clearly visible on the room's CCTV footage. From the footage, it's also evident that the man Jimmy shot recognized him the moment he saw him. Fear flashed across his face immediately. This clearly indicates that there was some past history between them. Now, the investigators must uncover what that history is. Meanwhile, after committing the murder, Jimmy meets a man named Roy. Roy is the one who arranged both the revolver and the car for him. The hit list that Jimmy carries was also given to him by Roy. When Jimmy asks Roy to name the rest of the targets, Roy demands double the payment. Jimmy threatens him, and just then, Roy's friend Kenny steps in to confront Jimmy. Kenny is a former UFC champion, a man capable of breaking bones in seconds. But the moment Kenny notices a specific tattoo on Jimmy's body, he becomes terrified and immediately flees the scene. Roy is left confused, unsure of what's really going on. With no other option, Roy gives Jimmy the rest of the names on the list without any conditions. So by now, it's clear that Jimmy is hunting down a list of people, but what exactly his grudge is against them remains a mystery that we'll uncover deeper into the movie. In the next scene, we're introduced to a hitman named Killer. With a muscular build and handsome face, he's seen spending a romantic moment with his girlfriend, Lily. But suddenly, he gets a call informing him that there's a mission for him. The client who has hired him is in serious danger. Someone is trying to kill him. And yes, you guessed it, that someone is Jimmy. The client's condition is simple. Killer must eliminate Jimmy before Jimmy gets to him. Without wasting any time, Killer says goodbye to Lily, gathers his weapons, and sets off to hunt down Jimmy. Meanwhile, as Cicero and Cop continue investigating the case, they uncover several crucial clues. Cicero tells Cop that many years ago, Jimmy was involved in a bank robbery and ended up in prison. However, technically, he shouldn't have been caught because the robbery was successful, and he had managed to escape from the police. Jimmy was the getaway driver in that heist, which is why people nicknamed him the driver. During the escape, when the police chased the robbers, it was Jimmy's incredible driving skills that allowed them to evade capture. But after their escape, another gang ambushed them and stole all the money. It was like a robbery on top of a robbery. That gang threatened them, demanding to know where the stolen money was. They warned that if they didn't reveal the location, they would kill Jimmy's crew one by one. And they did. They killed 2 of Jimmy's teammates, leaving only Jimmy and his brother Gary. Desperate to save his brother, Jimmy revealed the location of the hidden money. But even after getting the money, the gang brutally slit Gary's throat right in front of Jimmy. Witnessing his brother's horrific death left Jimmy completely shattered. Following this, the gang leader Tyson ordered Jimmy to be killed. Tyson, a deranged psychopath, had a habit of filming all his murders. As per his order, his men shot Jimmy and left him for dead. Tyson even recorded the whole scene on camera. However, miraculously, the low-caliber bullet that struck Jimmy in the head passed through his skull but didn't damage his brain. He survived the near-death experience, and a metal plate was implanted into his fractured skull. So, now it's clear even though in the beginning we didn't understand Jimmy's motives, we now know the truth, he's out for revenge. Avenging his brother's murder is now the only purpose of his life. After getting all the information about the gang from Roy, Jimmy makes it his mission to eliminate them one by one.
The second name on Jimmy's list is Tyson.
Meanwhile, the man who hired the hitman killer to assassinate Jimmy already knows who Jimmy's next target is. So, he sends Killer to that location, hoping he can take Jimmy out before Jimmy gets to Tyson. Meanwhile, Killer arrives at the location he was given, but Jimmy has already made his move. Inside the building, Jimmy comes face to face with Tyson, the psychotic gang leader, just as Tyson is preparing to kill a young woman. Without hesitation, Jimmy walks up to him and, just like before, shoots him in the forehead with a clean headshot. After eliminating Tyson, Jimmy exits the room only to be confronted by Killer. But before Killer can fire his weapon, Jimmy opens fire wildly in his direction. Killer is forced to take cover to avoid being hit. The two exchange multiple rounds of gunfire, but after a short while, Killer realizes that Jimmy has vanished like a ghost. A few moments later, he hears a car starting outside and looks out to see Jimmy escaping in his car. On the other side, when news of the shootout reaches the detectives, they rush to investigate. However, Detective Cop was on his way to take his son to a baseball game, so he arrives at the scene 2 hours late. Upon arrival, he learns from Cicero that multiple murder videos were recovered from Tyson's room, including the footage of Gary's brutal killing. With all the evidence in hand, Cop and Cicero decide to pursue the investigation with full force. While working together, Cicero suddenly notices a strange tattoo on Cop's hand. When he asks about it, Cop explains that he got it during his time in another police department and then tries to brush off the topic quickly. Meanwhile, Jimmy arrives at the house of someone who's not on his hit list, his former lover, Porterman. Years ago, after Jimmy went to prison, they gradually lost contact. Now, Porterman has moved on and built a new life for herself. Although they truly loved each other, fate drove them apart. At first, Porterman is angry to see him, but soon they both get emotional. As Jimmy prepares to leave, Porterman says she knows what he's doing to those men because she's seen all the news on TV. She urges him not to show them any mercy, because it was those very people who tore their lives apart. Meanwhile, after failing to complete the contract on Jimmy, Killer suddenly proposes to his girlfriend, Lily. He feels it's time to leave everything behind and live a normal life. Lily accepts, and the two of them get married in a joyous ceremony. After the wedding, Killer promises Lily that he's done with contract killings for good. Back to Detective Cop after finishing work, he returns home, but his wife Marina refuses to let him in. She's tired of his addiction. Early in the movie, there was a scene showing Cop dealing drugs, though his identity wasn't clear at the time. Now, it's confirmed that he has a serious substance abuse problem. After much pleading and apology, Marina lets him inside. Cop wanted to spend the night with his family, so Marina allows him some time with their son, Tom. However, late that night, Cop finds Marina lying unconscious in another room. To his shock, she's used his drugs. When Cop asks her why she did it, she says, "For everything we've done in the past, there's no forgiveness left. We're both going to hell for it." But what exactly she means by sins of the past remains unclear to the audience. At this point, each character seems to be tangled in deeper and darker layers, and their pasts are becoming increasingly murky, making everything feel a bit blurred and mysterious. But don't worry, by the end of the movie, all questions will be answered. Meanwhile, at that very time, Jimmy had already tracked down his third target, a man named Nixon, a former bouncer now working at a nightclub in the city. Jimmy spots him outside the club and immediately starts walking toward the entrance to kill him. Before entering, the security guard thoroughly checks Jimmy. Recognizing him, the guard doesn't say anything and lets him in. Jimmy quietly begins following Nixon around the club. Eventually, he gets the perfect opportunity. Nixon heads into the restroom to freshen up, and Jimmy follows him in, like the angel of death. Nixon sees him in the mirror and instantly understands what's about to happen. He calmly asks another man in the restroom to leave, then locks the door from the inside. Now, Nixon prepares himself for a hand-to-hand fight with Jimmy. Jimmy skillfully pulls out a hidden screwdriver from his body, something the security guard somehow missed during the thorough check at the club entrance. Nixon and Jimmy both take aggressive stances and launch into a brutal fight. Nixon pulls out a knife and lunges at Jimmy, but he can't keep up with Jimmy's speed and strength. After a fierce struggle, Jimmy manages to knock Nixon to the ground. Lying there in a critical state, Nixon, overwhelmed with guilt, apologizes to Jimmy for what he did in the past. With his dying breath, he requests Jimmy to call his son and tell him that his father is sorry. Jimmy silently picks up Nixon's phone and walks out. Once outside, he sits in his car and makes the call, informing Nixon's son that his father wanted to apologize. Meanwhile, Killer is at home, looking through his wedding photos with Lily, when he suddenly stumbles upon an old photo of Jimmy. The moment he sees it, he's stunned, almost as if he had forgotten about the unfinished business. Realizing this, he starts preparing his pistol to go after Jimmy again. Lily, seeing all this, becomes furious. Killer had promised her he'd leave that life behind, but he tells her he can't walk away, not until he finishes the job. Because in the world of contract killers, leaving a contract unfinished goes against every rule. On the other hand, Detective Cop wakes up after spending the night at home and sees the news about the attack on Nixon.
He assumes correctly that Jimmy must have been the one behind it.
Although Jimmy had left Nixon thinking he was dead, Nixon actually survived and was now in the hospital. Cop realizes this might be his one chance to arrest Jimmy, because he knows Jimmy will come to the hospital to finish the job.
So he immediately heads there.
And he's right. While driving, Jimmy hears on the radio that Nixon survived.
Without hesitation, he spins his car around and heads straight to the hospital.
By this time, Killer has also arrived outside the hospital. His contractor had already informed him that Jimmy would come there to finish Nixon. This confirms that it wasn't Tyson who hired Killer, someone else had placed the contract on Jimmy.
Meanwhile, inside the hospital, doctors are preparing Nixon for surgery. Jimmy sneaks in and shoots Nixon on the operating table, killing him instantly.
He then quickly begins to make his way out of the hospital. But the gunshot alerts Cop, who is already lying in wait.
He starts searching for Jimmy inside the building.
After a brief cat-and-mouse chase, they come face to face and begin exchanging gunfire.
Bullets miss them both, instead shattering hospital lamps and lights, plunging the corridor into darkness. At one point, Jimmy stops firing.
Cop, now moving slowly through the dark, inches forward. Just then, Jimmy appears and points his revolver directly at him. Cop drops his pistol and gets down on one knee, believing these to be his final moments. But to his shock, Jimmy spares his life. Jimmy's mission was solely to avenge his brother's killers. He never intended to harm innocent people or police officers. After letting Cop go, Jimmy escapes in his car. But right then, Killer, who had been waiting outside as instructed by his contractor, begins chasing after Jimmy, determined to complete his contract once and for all. Jimmy, seeing Killer chasing him, suddenly accelerates the car, increasing the speed several times. A high-speed chase follows, and after a while, Jimmy slams the brakes and stops his car in the middle of the road. He fires at Killer's car tires, but Killer manages to shoot Jimmy in the shoulder. However, since Jimmy was wearing a strong neck brace, the bullet doesn't cause any serious damage. Despite being shot, Jimmy drives off at high speed. Meanwhile, Killer receives a phone call. He's told that the contract has been terminated, as he's repeatedly failed to eliminate Jimmy. Jimmy heads straight to his home and points a gun at his mother, demanding to know where his stepfather is. His mother tells him that the man died years ago. Jimmy believed that his stepfather was the one who sold out their information to the gang. Before the bank heist, Gary had told his stepfather about the plan, and the man demanded half the share.
When Gary refused, Jimmy suspected that he betrayed them.
But his mother insists that the old man would never kill his own son. She tells Jimmy that the man loved Gary even more than him and considered him his real son. Then she asks Jimmy why he went along with Gary on that job in the first place. Gary had never been involved in crime. He was a good man like any ordinary person. Jimmy reveals that Gary had borrowed a large amount of money from dangerous gangsters, and robbing a bank was the only way out. The person originally meant to be the getaway driver backed out at the last minute, so Jimmy stepped in to help his brother. But helping his brother led to him losing Gary and spending 10 years in prison. Jimmy says goodbye to his mother and goes after his fourth target, a priest who now hosts religious seminars.
Years ago, this man, Alexander, was part of the gang. When Jimmy walks straight into his compound, Alexander is visibly terrified. He quickly announces a musical break to his audience and takes Jimmy into another room. Alexander knows Jimmy has come to kill him. He tells his wife and son to head home and walks outside with Jimmy. While walking, he begins to share how his life changed over the past 10 years. He admits he joined the gang out of desperation for money, but he never committed murder. He only stood guard during the crimes. When Gary was being killed, Alexander couldn't bear it and tried to stop them by shouting. Though he was part of a vile act for money, deep down he wasn't evil. Interestingly, he ended up in prison too. After serving his sentence, he turned to religion and began helping troubled youths. That's how he became a priest. Jimmy listens to everything, but doesn't fully soften. Alexander says, "I know I can't bring your brother back, but before you shoot me, please forgive me for what happened to him." Jimmy responds that he can't forgive anyone. Alexander kneels before him, awaiting death. Jimmy raises the revolver and fires, but the bullet goes over Alexander's head. Even though his heart had turned cold, some trace of humanity remained. He spares Alexander and walks away to the prayer hall. Alexander was the last name on Jimmy's list. He sits down, thinking his mission is complete.
Just then, Killer appears behind him and points a gun to his head. However, instead of shooting, Killer tells Jimmy to hand over the revolver. Jimmy calmly replies that he has no problem with Killer. But Killer takes this as an insult, thinking Jimmy sees him as a failure for not being able to kill him despite multiple attempts. He raises his revolver to shoot, but then notices the hit list lying nearby. He picks it up, laughs, and says, "You think your mission is over? It's not. You've got one target left. The person who hired me is still out there." That's when Jimmy suddenly realizes the man who shot him 10 years ago was never identified. That means the person who hired Killer is that same unknown man. Just then, Cop arrives. He had been tracking Jimmy's every move and followed him to the church. He enters and orders Killer to drop his weapon. Killer initially refuses, unwilling to let his prey go, but eventually drops the revolver. At that very moment, without hesitation, Cop shoots Jimmy in the head. Killer is stunned. He finally realizes the shocking truth: the person who hired him to kill Jimmy was Cop all along. Then Killer finally confesses that he was the one who shot Jimmy 10 years ago. That means he was a member of the gang all along. This also explains why Cicero had looked so carefully at the tattoo on Cop's hand that day. Cop further reveals that it was Marina, his current wife and the former girlfriend of Jimmy's gang member, who sold out Jimmy and Gary to the gang. That's why, earlier in the movie, she had said to Cop, while under the influence of drugs, "For what we did in the past, we both deserve to burn in hell." Jimmy had wrongly assumed it was his stepfather who betrayed them. But it turns out it was Marina all along. Even I didn't see this brutal twist coming. Hearing about Jimmy's return, Cop had become terrified and decided to eliminate him, so he hired Killer. But when Killer repeatedly failed, Cop took matters into his own hands and did it himself. After killing Jimmy, Cop tells Killer that his job is done and offers to pay him. But Killer refuses the money. He says he didn't complete his mission and doesn't deserve payment. He says goodbye, calls his girlfriend Lily, and tells her he's finally coming home, and with that, he retires from the hitman life for good. Meanwhile, Cop walks outside and calls his wife, telling her, "It's done, I killed Jimmy." Meaning, now all their worries are over, and they can finally start a safe, new life together. But just as he finishes the call, Jimmy suddenly appears from behind and shoots Cop in the back. As Cop falls to the ground, completely shocked, he can't understand how Jimmy survived a bullet to the head. Then Jimmy reminds him, "Did you forget? My skull has a metal plate." That's right, Jimmy survived not one, but 2 headshots, thanks to that surgical miracle. Jimmy then fires one last shot right to Cop's head, ending his life and finally completing his long-awaited revenge. As Jimmy walks away, Cicero arrives at the scene. Over the course of the investigation, he had pieced everything together and realized that Cop was the missing piece in this entire mystery. In fact, he had requested this case himself, not because it was assigned, but because he had suspicions and wanted the truth. After digging through old case files and connecting the dots, Cicero had discovered the truth, but by the time he got to the location, it was already too late. Cop had already been killed by Jimmy. In the final scene, we see Jimmy standing by a river. After avenging his brother's brutal murder, he scatters Gary's ashes into the water, finally bringing peace to his soul and perhaps to his own as well. And just like that, this intense and mind-blowing revenge story comes to an end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more such thrilling action movie breakdowns.